Needless to say, I was impressed by the Huntsmen this past weekend in Seattle because despite all the excitement around this team, there were some real questions on how they look coming into the event, right? They were by no means the clear cut favorite. There were a few other names that were tossed into the bin, or rather into the conversation for who would come out as champion, right? There were questions on whether or not the Huntsmen could be on form with only a few days of practice, right? They recently added Prestini because coming into their pool, they had some solid competition, right? It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a clear cut favorite for who was going to make it out of this group. First of all, a few of the teams that they had to worry about the rocker, right? Considered a top four team coming into this group, despite off of what was kind of a bad placement for them. A lot of people thought that they would turn it around. OGLA, right? They're hot off a grand final appearance in Florida. Chino seemed to make all the difference for this team. And then the other roster, right? Paris, while they've started to lower in the standings, are still a very crafty team. And despite the losses that they have suffered recently, very rarely do you see them get 3-0. They've only been 3-0 once coming into this particular event. So you expect a late series versus the Legion. However, with all of those things known, with the way that this group looked, the Huntsmen, for the most part, made their group look somewhat easy, right? Now, they did have to face off, rather, they didn't have to face off against Optic. However, a majority of their wins kind of what came through good respawn victories, solid clutches toward the stretch, and overall an impressive level of consistency, especially when it came to hardpoint. Again, it was hard to kind of point the finger at where exactly the Huntsmen would sit for this event, as what I think they only had maybe 4 or 5 days of practice, as the Pristine deal happened very, very last second. According to what Hex has talked about, according to what Pristine has talked about, that deal literally happened just a few days before this event kind of came through. And so with someone who kind of plays the pace that he does, my big question was, hey, how are they going to play with someone who is much different than Gunless in terms of speed? How are they going to mesh with a player who maybe changes up their map pool, changes up what good or rather what kind of games or maps that they're good at with this new team? But I think for me, the biggest kind of key for the Huntsmen to start off this event was in fact their first series versus Paris, because I felt like that was almost the best practice that they could have had, especially if they wanted to go far in the event. This is a team, like I said, in Paris that is kind of competitive in all modes. They're going to be good in domination if they can get that gun runner dom, which is exactly what they got here versus Chicago. This is a roster that I have pointed out in Paris is a team that can make mistakes. So if you are in some ways the Chicago Huntsmen and you want to be battle tested coming into the rest of the event, this is a roster where you have the opportunity to watch and see the issues that this particular team is going to make. And the Huntsmen did that, especially when it came down to the hard points. They did a great job. I think what was it? It was at exploiting Cave West on Azir Cave, and they also did a great job breaking docks multiple times on Hackney Yard, despite Paris holding that. And so for me, that was kind of their best matchup that they could have asked for if they wanted to go far for this event. Face off against a solid Paris team who's going to be competitive in most to every single mode, and especially a team that's going to test you when it comes down to the respawns. That would later set them up for what was a big match versus Minnesota. Minnesota off of a solid victory. And to be honest with you, I actually had the Rocker winning this. When it came down to my personal day-to-day predictions, I thought that Minnesota would walk away with this. I thought they'd be too good progressively throughout the series for the Huntsmen to really make a massive impact when it came down to this. But they had a close game one. They had a close game two. I think the S&D was around 11. But that, I think, showed Chicago that they can compete, right? Once I saw this victory, I thought, okay, this might be Chicago's, right? Based on the way that the other matches are looking throughout the rest of the event. After the win versus the Rocker, it kind of showed, I think, this team, the community, myself, all right, this team's here to stay. Now, granted, I don't think that Minnesota have been on their same level, but that was one of the teams that was probably in the highest contention with Chicago to be victors of this event, right? Obviously, New York was in there, OGLA was in there, but a lot of people, including myself, had some big stock in the Rocker to improve from their last event. The fact that Chicago doesn't drop a map, despite how close map one and map two were, I thought was very, very impressive. But that now led in to another big series here in the semis versus New York. And at the time, this one was a little bit hard to call, right? New York kind of came back after an early loss to London. They're always a very sound respawn team, or rather, I should say, a very sound hardpoint team. And again, another impressive victory for the Huntsmen as they managed to win both hard points versus the subliners. I think they closed it out on bad side Hackney, which is a very, very big win for them. Chicago also managed to beat New York on Ramaza. And for those that have kind of followed the scene very closely or kind of followed map pools very closely, I am almost positive this is the first time that we have seen New York lose Ramaza hardpoint and actually lose Ramaza anything. I don't think they've ever lost Ramaza since Mac has joined the team. So the fact that it could be the Huntsmen who in their first event together were able to do this was very, very impressive, considering the way that New York plays, but also because of how big of a rotation battle that Ramaza can be. And for a new team, I thought they expressed great teamwork. And for a new roster with a new piece on this lineup, I thought that it was very, very impressive for them to kind of come into the Rocker Series, win that, and then for them to also win two arguably very difficult hardpoints versus a team that is argued as one of the best hardpoint teams in the game. And then right, we head into the finals as pretty much the semis have been the issue for Chicago. They finally get over that hump as we see them in the grand finals for the first time since their win at the London home series. Again, they face off against the Royal Ravens, or not again, but they face off against the Royal Ravens. They win a Ramaza, lose the S&D versus what is a great S&D team, especially when Wuskin is hitting with the sniper the way that he was. But the big talking point for me, and pretty much the entirety of this event, if you were to hear anything that I'm talking about, this is the major talking point for me, was the domination, right? It's the fact that Chicago beats London by 1 point in the gun and runner dom. Because if the Ravens win that dom, if we're looking for the future, let's say the Huntsmen take game 4 after the domination victory, or rather, if let's say that they win the hard point after they lose, what would be a close dom? Then we have a game 5 on gun runner S&D. Now that's a map that both teams won kind of coming into this semifinal match, but we know the history of the Royal Ravens in Search and Destroy on Gunrunner, the way that they play their offenses, the way that they can be aggressive toward cargo, especially with Scraps and Dylan. That for me was the map that gave Chicago their championship. Because I'll be 100% honest with you, I think if we see the Ravens close out the Gunrunner Dom, I think we see them close this out in game 5. I think that we're calling the Ravens champions if that domination happens to go the opposite way. If Scump doesn't get that clutch 2-piece, I think that this one is the Ravens' victory. But nonetheless, right, I was very, very impressed by how quickly the Huntsmen managed to figure things out, especially whenever I talked about it. The hard point, they finished 7-0 in that mode, winning by an average of 40 points. They finished 3-1 in S&D, 2-2 in domination. But the big question, though, for me, after this event had kind of concluded and kind of the realization of the matchups that Chicago had, where do we rank them, right? Because we didn't have Dallas, we didn't have Atlanta at this event. Where do we rank the Chicago Huntsmen now? Are they on the same level, right? Are they on the same level as arguably the two top teams in the game? I probably should even say arguably. That should be the standard, right? Those two teams at the top, Chicago in third. Can they compete with the two teams that sit above them? From what I saw in Seattle, I don't put Chicago on the same level as Dallas or FaZe yet. Now, I do think they have the ability, right? I think they have the ability to reach that. I've been someone who said, hey, this edition of Prestini, it is only going to get better as time goes on, right? They're only going to get more reps with him. They're only going to learn his play style more. They're only going to figure out their best game modes, their map pool now with someone like Prestini, which is going to change up a little bit at the very least. It's going to take some time for them to fine tune that out. But Chicago, I believe, in this particular event, got some very good reps versus top 4 and top 6 caliber rosters, right? They managed to exploit a lot of mistakes versus other teams. However, versus the top dogs, I don't think that those teams make those mistakes. And can Chicago exploit those to the fact and to the way that they did, right? I don't think the Huntsmen will be able to rely on a 7-0 hardpoint record in a tournament that involves FaZe and the Empire. Because we have seen teams previously rely on one game mode and it doesn't work, right? Most recently, when it comes down to the subliners, hardpoint, this team would probably be in a grand final so far throughout the season if they were better in S&D and domination, right? You can't be solely reliant on one game mode to kind of get you over the edge. And the major talking point for Chicago, never saw a game 5. right? Well, what happens if they do versus London, right? What happens if they do versus X team, Minnesota? Obviously, that was a 3-0, but still, nonetheless, what happens if this team, this new roster, goes to a game 5? What happens then, right? I think one area for Chicago that they really need to dive into would actually be search and destroy. Despite the domination record, I think S&D needs to be their focus, because outside of the Ravens, they didn't face off against the stiffest of competition when it came down to search and destroy, right? If Chicago wants to compete, which I believe that they will get there, but if they want to be on the same level as FaZe in the Empire, it's to make sure that they aren't one dimensional, right? And with the way that domination works in terms of spawns and other factors, I think their focus needs to be on S&D, as that has been an issue with this roster previously, right? They used to have the issue in search and destroy of 1 to 2 players going off, right? That was kind of the same story for this event. Prestini and Envoy, they play well. Nobody else on this team finishes above a 0.67 KD in that particular game mode, right? When the Huntsmen won the London home series, it wasn't about their hard point. It wasn't about their dom. It was, in fact, about their search and destroy, right? When they lost to Paris, or rather when they were losing modes to Paris, it was the hard points, right? What got them over the edge? Search and destroy saved the Huntsmen in the semifinals versus Paris after Paris won both hard points. S&D got them over the edge. When they beat Dallas earlier on in that event, as well as in the finals, what got them over the edge? The round 11 search and destroy leading into the domination. At the start of the season, when the Huntsmen looked like the best they have all year, it was because they could rely and win S&Ds, which typically for old Optic, now Huntsman teams, it's usually about the respawns, right? When we talk about the old Dynasty team, when we talk about what other rosters that this old Optic, now Huntsman team have had, it is typically where S&D is kind of where they struggle. But I think you've got some great pieces to work with for this mode in the future, right? We've seen Scump be great in search and destroy at different times. He had some excellent clutches in S&D at this event. Arcades, we've seen, can be solid. Envoy has been a savior for this group multiple times in this mode throughout the year. And I think Prestini also could be a great option as well when it comes down to this mode. So are the Huntsmen on the same level as Empire and FaZe? Not yet, right? I don't think they are, at least as of right now. From what we saw in Seattle, I don't think that they are ready for that matchup yet. But the way I believe that they can get there is through becoming a more well-versed team in search and destroy. I'm not saying they need to become the best S&D team in the world, right? I don't think that is a realistic expectation for them as of right now. But you need to be able to rely on that mode from time to time, right? I think they'll naturally get better at domination, right? You can say, oh, well, they need to get better at domination. I think that based on this team, I think based on the way that this team works, instinctively, I think they're going to improve on that, right? Based on the communicators this team has, based on the lineup that they've got, the way that domination just works in general, I think this team gets better naturally at domination as the reps continue. But the teams ahead of Chicago right now, Dallas and Atlanta, are both very similar, right? In that they're solid in hardpoint, solid in respawns, but S&D is where they win their series. I think for the Huntsmen, it needs to be in reverse, right? If the Huntsmen play well enough, they'll have to probably face off against both of these teams at the next event. But I believe that S&D can be where they get themselves over the edge. Be great at respawns, right? Be great in hardpoint, be great in dom, but S&D is what is going to get this team over the edge, because they can't rely, like New York can, they can't rely on the hardpoint consistently, because it's not going to get them there. I think they have to be, in some ways, a reverse team to Atlanta and Dallas, and that you are great in the respawns, prefer the respawns, and are still solid in search and destroy. That is the mode I believe that will get them over the edge, because they're going to have to work on that coming into this next event. That, I think, can be the key to success for the Huntsmen in Minnesota and for the remainder of the season.